Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this presentation by ViroGates with its full year report for 2020. In a few minutes, you're going to hear a word from CEO Jakob Knudsen and CFO Jakob da Silva. Sorry, Mark da Silva. We have the honor of hosting this today as we cover the company with our research, and my name and moderator today is Alf Riple at Västra Hamnen Corporate Finance. As I said, we're going to have a short presentation by the company first, and after that there will be a Q&A. And as an attendee, you can ask questions by writing them. There's an icon that looks like a talk bubble. It has a name that says questions. You can write it there and we will read it out and the company will answer. So the final thing for me to say is that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be found later on at ViroGates homepage and at Västra Hamnen's YouTube channel, so you can find it there. So with that, I give the word to you, Jakob.
Okay, thank you very much, Alf. We're very happy to present our annual report for 2020. My name is Jakob Knudsen, and I'm the CEO of ViroGates, and I have Mark da Silva sitting just across from me. So without further ado, we will rush into a brief introduction to the company that gives you some kind of a background, and then we will dive a little bit deeper into the accomplishments of 2020. Typical forward-looking statements. We improve patient outcomes by empowering healthcare professionals to make better informed clinical decisions, leading to more efficient patient triage. So what does all this mean? Triage is not as commonly used in the Nordic countries, but very much in the South. It's basically the decision that the emergency departments make as the initial step so as to decide whether the patient should be admitted into the hospital or discharged for either treatment by a general practitioner, an appointed schedule, or sent home. We do so by measuring a protein called suPAR, and suPAR is an inflammatory biomarker, and that means that the higher the suPAR, the more inflammation is ongoing in the patient's body. So that can be a chronic inflammation, it can be an acute inflammation. We've seen during the COVID that it often plays together, and chronic inflammation is often a precursor of a worse outcome in the more acute inflammatory response. So this is what the acute care physicians are dealing with when they first see the patient coming into the hospital. It can be a personal walk-in in some of our markets, and it can often be an ambulance bringing in, or a general practitioner that is referring into this acute care department or emergency department. And the physicians there need to make a pretty swift decision as to whether to admit the patients or to discharge them for appointed schedules. So we can do so by measuring the suPAR and adding that information to the discharge or the admission processes. suPAR is elevated by a lot of different diseases, as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide. It can be anything from diabetes, cancers, kidney disease, liver diseases, organ failures, sepsis. So whenever we see elevated suPAR, it generally predicts a bad outcome for the patient. So the higher the suPAR, the worse the outcome. It can be an increase of the actual inflammatory response, a development of the disease, or it can be potentially leading on to something else like organ failures and so on. And on the right-hand side, you see a plot from one of the studies that we've been doing, and this basically shows that the higher the suPAR, i.e. in the red graph part of the graph, the worse the outcome for the patient. There are a lot more patients up in the green area, and those are the ones that we should find early on, so we can free up the capacity in the hospital systems, allowing the physicians to focus on the right patients. This next slide is actually a very important slide. It may be a little bit complicated, but what we're seeing here is to the left-hand side, you're seeing what the physicians typically see today by ways of a standard triaging system. They measure the blood pressure, the oxidation rates of the patient's blood, and so on. And that all makes up for a score, and thereby they use that to triage the patient, to risk assess the patients. And as you can see, there are quite a few of patients that fall in the yellow category. Those are the somewhat problematic patients, because you don't really know whether to admit or discharge them. So they typically take up a lot of time, a lot of focus in the acute care department. If we put Super on top of that, this is exactly the same population out of this study, where we can see that there's a lot more patients in the green bar, and also a slightly more in the high risk. So that means in total, more patients can be discharged earlier on, and more patients that are actually in risk can then be admitted first time and do not need to revisit the hospital later on. So this is actually what the physicians like to see. So it's a beautiful illustration of what our product can help the physicians achieve. Next slide shows how we began our more commercial side of our journey. We listed on a Nasdaq First North Growth market in 2018, and we've been listed there in Denmark, but it's perfectly legit to buy the stock also in Sweden, obviously. We are headquartered in ViroGates, just north of Copenhagen, and we focus very much on our Super brand and the associated products. On the right hand side, you see our product assortment, ranging from what is known as the Autoflex ELISA. That's basically a research product. So a lot of the early research has been done using that product, and it still plays a role in some of our clinical research. Whereas the two products on the far right side, Quick Triage and Two-Way Latex, are actually the ones that we're pinning our commercial aspirations to, because those are the ones that allow the physicians a result in 20 minutes. The Quick Triage takes 20 minutes. The Two-Way Latex takes about 10 minutes to run, but altogether with other biomarkers, it actually yields and results very quickly for the acute care physicians, and that's typically the way that they get other blood samples reported. A little word on the Two-Way Latex, because that's probably, or it is the most important product in our portfolio and the basis for our growth. It can be compared to a laser printer, where we supply the toner to the laser printer, which is already in place in the central lab of the hospital. So basically, when we disclose that we have validated our products for another platform, we can be used by that particular laser printer, so to speak. So we have now access to instruments from Roche, from Siemens, and from Abbott, some of the big players in this market. And it's very easy for the central labs now to run a quick verification and get it up and working. So that is one of the very important development steps that have been a precursor of our commercial journey. In terms of our commercial model, we are CE-IVD cleared in Europe, and we've deployed a direct sales force in Nordic countries, in France and in Spain, and that was where we started our journey. And this was the reason for that was primarily that we didn't need in those markets to go through a rigorous reimbursement process. There are other markets where we don't need that. It's actually the majority of the markets, but we have established a good foothold there, and that's also where the bulk of our clinical customers have come from. And in addition to this, we've also seen that Greece is picking up this year with a lot of clinical use. And we also complement our direct sales force by an indirect sales channel, and that's managed here from a dedicated employee here at our headquarters, who works with our different appointed distributors in the markets. So that's something that we're looking to optimize, obviously, but right now we're still pushing hard in the first markets to get more coverage. In terms of what we've achieved so far, we have more than 10 hospitals in clinical routine with Super now in 6 countries. So that's an important achievement during 2020. We have a good pipeline of hospitals that have been made acquainted with suPARnostic and are looking to implement it. Needless to say, we had a bit of a stop in some of the development in 2020 due to COVID. But then we also, on the contrary, towards the end of the year, saw interest in the use of suPAR for COVID triage, and Mark is going to get a little bit back on that. We've done a very extensive clinical studies by now. More than 700 peer-reviewed articles are out on what is known as PubMed, kind of a database of journals where we can look at the suPAR studies that have been done, and we've conducted more than 400,000 blood tests by now globally. So it's a well-established biomarker. And I'll leave the word to Mark now for a rundown on the achievements during 2020.
Perfect. Thanks, Jakob. Yes, I'll take you through some of the highlights of our annual report 2020 that we released yesterday. And we believe there's three different main takeaways you should take away from it. And the first one is on the top line, on the revenue side. Second one is more on the sales mix, the product mix that we've sold, and then the third one is with regards to our potential in COVID-19. If we start with the first one on revenue, as you'll see on the screen, we increased our revenue with 49% to roughly 5.35 million Danish kroner. We did this with a relatively flat bottom line, and the reason for this is there's a couple of reasons, but one of them is that COGS increased slightly as we shifted towards the more clinically relevant products. Secondly, we had some one-off sales and marketing expenses related to free kits that were given in old agreements that we do not expect to continue. And then lastly, we had some sales payments on the EU grant, the COVID-19 project that we're running. So we don't expect the net result to be flat going forward when you look at our increasing revenue, obviously. Looking at the product mix or the sales mix as we had in 2020, you'll see that from 2019 to 2020, we've managed to shift quite dramatically the sales mix across our products. And the quick triage and the TurbiLatex product here highlighted by the red and green numbers, you see are the clinically relevant products. And by clinically relevant, we mean the products that you can actually use at a hospital to make patient decisions as to whether they should be discharged or sent home. And in 2019, we practically had no sales within those two products, and in 2020 they constitute the majority of our sales. And one note on that is that the TurbiLatex product, which is the product that we expect to be the big growth driver going forward, that was first released in the end of 2018 after the IPO, and we started commercializing it in 2019. So that's also the reason why there haven't been that much historic sales in the product. But that's, at least for us, a main takeaway from the annual report is that we show that our strategy with focusing on Europe and focusing on acute care, the clinical decisions there, that is working, and we believe that is shown by the fact that the TurbiLatex and quick triage sales have increased quite dramatically. And then on sort of third thing is our potential within COVID-19. And early on when the pandemic hit in the beginning of 2020, we had a hypothesis that suPAR could be used to predict negative outcomes for COVID-19 patients. And by negative outcomes, that's primarily who will end up needing ventilation, who will develop what's called a severe respiratory failure of COVID-19 patients. And we saw a study coming out in March from Greece showing that patients with a high suPAR level, so suPAR level above 6 nanogram per milliliter, they had 16 times higher risk for the need of intubation than other patients. So that was a first confirmatory result that our hypothesis could have some merit. After that, we applied for an EU grant that involved a clinical trial in Greece, but also taking home some production to Europe to accommodate a potential increase in demand for COVID-19 patients. At the same time, in June last year, we saw a new study coming out that again confirmed our hypothesis that suPAR were significantly associated with severe negative outcomes for COVID-19 patients. And then after the annual report or the last year was concluded, in January we announced a collaboration with Hellenic Sepsis Study Group in Greece to run a randomized clinical trial across 42 hospitals in Greece and Italy, where suPAR for the first time is linked as a companion diagnostic device to a treatment called anakinra for COVID-19 patients. And what does that mean? That means that for patients with a high suPAR level, you should be giving a certain treatment, or that's at least what we're testing in this study. The potential here is, of course, that suPAR could become the first companion diagnostics device for guiding treatment of COVID-19 patients. And this study is built upon an exploratory study that was released where we showed that we could halve mortality and halve severe respiratory failure incidents amongst COVID-19 patients. So we're naturally quite excited to see what the results of this clinical trial will show, as it could have a quite a significant impact on the potential of using suPAR for COVID-19 in Europe. I guess that's sort of the three main takeaways from the report. And then when we look a bit further towards 2021, we believe that we have now a more robust platform than we had going into 2020. And that's because of we have a larger customer base making recurring orders. We get more orders than we've seen previously. We have a more healthy sales mix that's sort of favoring the clinical routine products now compared to the research products in the past. With more validations coming out for more instruments in the market, meaning that we're sort of expanding the addressable market on the hospitals. We have new products expected to come to market in 2021, the second half, which is this point of care device where we can measure suPAR with just a finger prick of blood. Then we have a stronger online presence and have shifted during the pandemic sort of a lot of our sales activities to being online. And lastly, we've run a lot of commercial excellence projects in the organization to sort of streamline and optimize our offering positioning and go-to-market model during 2020, and many of those projects also continuing into the new year. So we're looking ahead with excitement on a 2021 and still maintain our strategic objective of becoming cash flow positive with the existing cash at hand. I guess that's the highlights of the annual report and looking a bit ahead. Now I would like to open up for any potential questions that you, Alf, or any of the listeners might have.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I would like to repeat also and to the listeners that it's possible to write your questions. Look for an icon with a question mark. Sorry, a talk bubble, and there will be the name question. You can write it there. If you don't see all of the controls, maybe you have to click on the red arrow, orange arrow that enlarges all the controls. Then you can see where to write your questions. I would like to start first of all in referring back to the last thing you talked about there, Mark, about the anakinra study. You said this is a phase 3 trial with 600 patients. It sounds as if that's something that could take quite a long time. Do you have any expectation on when you can expect to come back to the market and tell us about the outcome?
It's a really good question, and obviously this study is not sort of driven by us, and we don't know the results of the study. We know that they're progressing quite well on enrolling patients, also due to COVID-19 situation in those markets. Right now, and Jakob, you can sort of add to this, but we don't have a guidance on exactly when we will know the results of the study. But we know that the enrollment is going pretty well.
Okay, And I think you wrote somewhere that the patient treatment period is 28 days, and I guess the follow-up period is probably pretty short. I mean, either you live or you die, don't you? So I mean, the time spent per patient in this trial is maybe not that long. Can you comment on that?
Yes, that's correct. I think if one goes to the clinicaltrials.gov, it is expected that a relatively short enrollment period should be anticipated, and that's why a pretty good guess would be at least first half for any new first half of the year for any news on that this exciting study. And just a correction, it's a label extension of an already marketed drug. So so we're looking at potentially adding this treatment of COVID patients to this label insert of this particular drug, but with the addition that it's based on stratification by suPAR. So that's what makes it so exciting to us, that an actual treatment is linked to the high suPAR values.
And the idea is that when you go to market eventually, it's going to be a combination product between the pharmaceutical and the suPAR test.
Yes, that's correct.
And I just want to make sure that I heard you right. Did you say that you can expect to hear back within the first half of this year?
Yes, we would expect that.
Okay, great.
With all the caveats that it's an investigator-driven study, so in the hands of somebody else, but that would be fair to assume.
And depending on how the COVID waves will develop, obviously.
Okay, yeah. Secondly, you also talked about validation of different analysis platforms, and you have announced recently that you added the Abbott Alinity platform to your host of different platforms. So now you have a lot of the bigger platforms. Is it possible to estimate how much, if you count all the analysis platforms out there at all the hospitals in the world, what percentage, or at least in the relevant market, what percentage of those hospitals do you think you would be validated for?
It's a good question, Alf, and the good questions are often the ones that come with a little bit of uncertainty. But we had obviously looked into this, and in some markets, the majority of the markets that we are in, Roche is quite strong, but we have sort of pools where other players are playing. So I would say a round estimate would be that we are covering some 70% of the market with the platforms already. One has to remember that this turbidimetric platform market is basically a product of some sort of consolidation in the bigger players. So for instance, Siemens is using products or product platforms that have been in the hands of Bayer Diagnostics, Dane Behring, Silva Corning, and so on in the past. But the most integrated one is the Roche Cobas, and this was the first one that we got. This was the most strategically important, but the most recent one, the Alinity, is the product of the future for Abbott. So we obviously started with the most commercially relevant ones.
I see. Great. And also you mentioned there, Mark, when you showed how your product split is now compared to how it was before. It's showing that there's an obvious drift from the ELISA to the other platforms. And I think you said also that the Turbilytics is the product that you think is going to dominate in the near term. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And if you look at each of these products, how do they compare when it comes to gross margins? Are they roughly the same, or is that different? You said something earlier also that there was an increase in COGS due to the shift in product mix.
Yes.
How does that look?
Yes, there is a difference in the COGS, but in the gross margins. When you look at the ELISA, that's close to 90% in gross margin, and currently our clinically relevant products, so that's Turbilytics and Quick Triage, are closer to 80%. So there is a decrease in gross margin as we shift towards these. we do expect that as we scale up and as we, through this EU grant, can take home some of the production to Europe that we previously had in Japan, we do expect some margin improvements on it, but not at the level of the ELISA product.
Okay.
But overall, it's a nice margin.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we calculated your gross margin for the full year to some, or for the quarter, for the fourth quarter to something like 78%, I think. So I think a lot of people envy you for that. I received a few questions from an investor before this meeting, and to all of you listening, I would just say that this is a very good idea for future conferences to mail in questions beforehand. The first question is, how many % of your revenue is currently from customers using suPARnostic for COVID triage? Is that possible to say?
We can give you a ballpark guess. It's a little bit like splitting the lukewarm water into cold and hot in the sense that we don't exactly know, but we know a little bit. We have a little bit of guidance from the customers that have implemented us with a focus on COVID-19, and that's 2 of the Spanish hospitals, and then a couple of the Greek hospitals. So ballpark, I would say for the year that went, it was probably a small 10-20%. Whereas a little bit more now, but having said that, we are not a specific product for COVID-19. So we obviously appreciate that we play a role in COVID-19 triage, but it's important for us to stress that COVID-19 is an infectious disease that is affecting this flow of patients. But generally, the risk stratification, the triage with suPARnostic remains the same, also past this pandemic. So we see it as a catalyst for some that have implemented the product, but also something that will stay on post the COVID-19.
Okay. Yeah. Second question here from the investor is, a lot of data has been generated by American researchers on kidney diseases. Are there any plans to sell suPARnostic to American hospitals? And if so, what are you doing right now to reach this goal?
Yeah, we've not given exact guidance as to American plans. Just as a background, the US is somewhat different to the CE-IVD clearance in Europe, in the sense that it's much more focused on and a very specific indication, and also on the product application. It's a kind of a route that Europe will also take with the new regulations coming into place next year. But we basically waited a bit. We guided in the prospectus that we were well aware that this product could play a huge role also in the US, with the focus on the responsibilities, the liabilities for the hospitals in triage. But we've not guided on any potential interactions with the US. It's correct that a lot of kidney work has been done, and other work as well in the US. But we can't really comment specifically on activities related to the FDA.
Okay. Yeah. Right. And you said there in your answer, you referred back to what's coming to Europe, new regulations. Does what you said there mean that suPARnostic would have to be approved for specific illnesses or conditions, and not as a blanket test as it is now?
Yes and no. There's a certain period in which you have to get migrate to the different sort of the different regulatory landscape. The majority, I guess, what most people are focusing on is the requirement for what is called a notified body, which is sort of comparable to an accountant. It's basically somebody who, on behalf of the authorities, sort of safeguard that you have your quality systems in place and so on. We do not foresee a huge issue here because we have actually documented all our claims by ways of extensive clinical research. So that is in place, but it's correct that at least some platform companies have seen this as a potential big hurdle. It's not something that is frightening us because we have actually had access to very good patient pools. That's one of the advantages of working in the Nordics, where we actually have very good registries on patients. So it's a good place to start a diagnostic company, if you like, as opposed to the US.
Okay. Also, I want to touch upon your forthcoming point of care product that you're developing together with Genspeed. You announced earlier this year that there was a delay. It was supposed to be launched. Was it Q1 or Q2 this year? But what is the latest? When do you expect this to come to market?
Second half of this year is our current guidance. It is a development product at this point in time, and as you can appreciate from the guidance, it's relatively advanced, but we do still need to run clinical validations and so on and finalize the product. So right now we have guided that it's the second half of 2021, and it is an exciting product. It's not something that is holding us back from obtaining our objectives as stated by Mark, but it potentially can get us into additional markets like ambulances and GPs and so on. So it is an exciting project that we're looking forward to also launching.
Also, earlier this year, or rather at the end of last year, you said that you had signed up a new routine customer in Finland and also a private clinic in Sweden. And from what I read, the Swedish clinic were expecting to use suPARnostic in a slightly different way from the hospital triages. That's more to do with lifestyle checks. Is that correct? And can you explain how that is playing out?
Yeah, that's correct, Alf. The lifestyle segment also ties a little. I mean, our planned sort of launch of that is tied very closely with the Genspeed product because it doesn't need this venous blood sample to be taken. But this was an early adopter, if you like, that wanted to do suPAR testing on healthy individuals to look at the impact of a healthier living, more training, better diets, and so on. So it's small scale, but it's something that is playing on the trend of more personalized and patients that are taking more charge over their own lifestyle. So it's the early adopter of things to come, I would say.
Yeah, I know you have announced plans earlier to go for the retail sector, so to speak, and this kind of applications. Do you get feedback that indicates that this could be a model customer that you could leverage on to run that marketing?
We also have a few customers who are extremely interested here in Denmark with respect to this. What is typically the cumbersome thing is the infrastructure of having to draw venous blood. So I think without sort of marginalizing the effects of marketing and so on, it will be hugely beneficial when we get this point of care, real point of care finger prick product, because then basically anyone can measure the suPAR, and there's a huge interest in this. We have been a little bit exposed also in the media here in Denmark with respect to this and how lifestyle changes affects our ability to live a healthy life. And most recently also with the COVID, we know that the host response, the host inflammation level by the patients play a huge role in who actually develop severe respiratory failure. So I'm definitely sure that we're playing something along a trend which is going to be increasing over the next 2, 3, 4 years, where this is becoming much more important. It has just been very pivotal to us to also start with establishing ourselves in the hospitals, so that patients who may get a higher level actually have somewhere to present and discuss with physicians who are also aware of suPAR before we sort of put the cart before the horse, if you like. If patients go up and doctors are not equipped to address these higher suPAR levels. So I think we're still doing the rollout in the right way, but the patients are getting more and more informed, and we also like to play into that market in the future.
I see. I just want to remind the audience there's still time for a question or two. So if you're a quick typer, you can type one question. In the meantime, I just have one final question to the numbers you reported, and it is about revenue split once again, and focusing on customers. I know that back in the days you relied very much on one customer, and we noticed that when this customer had some problems, then your revenues fell quite markedly also. How is it now? I mean, I expect with the increasing number of routine customers, you will probably have a much wider distribution of the revenues. Is that correct?
That's definitely correct. So we have quite a few more customers now, both on the clinical routine side, but also through distributors all over Europe. So I would say that historically that customer was within the ELISA sales as well, and just by looking at the sales mix we now have for the clinically relevant product, you see that it's much more tilted towards that. So we're not reliant on one single customer anymore to keep up the revenue, and it is one of the main things that we've seen in 2020 is that our customer base have expanded quite significantly in a historic context. Yeah.
All right. I can't see any more questions, and I don't have any more questions noted on my piece of paper. So with that, I don't know if you want to add anything, Jakob or Mark, before we close this.
Just a thank you to all the participants that have devoted their time to listening to our case, and we look forward to engaging further with you. If there's anything in the meantime, just reach out to either myself or Mark. We're happy to interact also across Øresund, and I know that we're actually welcome again. I don't know if that goes the other way actually with the travel restrictions, but we are looking forward also to be physically present in Sweden sometime in the near future.
You can come over here, Jakob, but you can never go back.
Exactly.
But also maybe you should also let the audience know that we have agreed that you will come and speak at our conference on the 8th of June. So there's always that to look forward to.
Yeah, and then we'll see if I can get back, but otherwise I'll stay in Melbourne.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Alf.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.